there in the session this morning, and those who've joined us just exclusively for this session, a warm welcome to all of you from Acedge, from IIID, as well as our student partners, NASA. And we have Architecture Live, who's our media partner. Thanks for to all of you for the association, and IIID for co-hosting this with us. Before I pass it on to Nandu, I mentioned in the morning as well, I'm trying to live up to my reputation of asking questions. So I have 3 questions here going to be posed to you, and would be great if you can send your answers to hello@acedge.in. Team Acedge will type the email ID and the questions in the chat box. And those who, the first 3 correct answers get a small token of our appreciation. All 3 answers to be on the same email that comes to us. So my first question to you is, this person, and please don't type your answers in the chat box. If you do, you're giving somebody else an opportunity to probably get there first. So this person sought to unearth the human. Who is he or she? Is my first question to you. I will put the questions down in the chat box as well after I finish asking all 3. So the first one is, this person sought to unearth the human. Who is he or she? The second question is, there was a movie on the life of B.P. Doshi made by this architect's brother. Who is the architect and what is the name of the brother we're talking about? So this movie, the movie on life of B.P. Doshi, was made, it's quite a renowned movie, was made by this architect's brother. Who is the architect and what is the name of his brother? Clare Arni, who's here with us, who's one of our panelists, co-designed a project portraying women in South India. Can we have the name of that project? So these are my 3 questions to you. I'm going to hand over to Nandu to take this forward and to introduce our panelists, and let's have fun. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon from Hyderabad, and welcome to this afternoon session. It's my privilege to introduce you to the base group. None of them need introductions, but probably just to remind people of what the base group was. So base is a name adopted by a group of architects in Bangalore, spanning across 7 different practices. It originally started as the Bangalore Architects Society for Education to discuss and start a new school of architecture. And it is made up of Shankar Kanade, who's indisposed and not joined with us. His brother Navnath Kanade, Chandavarkar, Sanjay Mohe, Edgar Demello, and we'll be missing 2 of the founders, Sharat Padalkar and Nikhilani, and Claire's here who was also part of the original group. As it went on with these discussions, the other B came into picture, and the urban legend is BASE stands for beer and slide evenings, I guess. Today's talk is anchored by Bijoy. Bijoy is a partner, is 100 hands with his partner Sunita. He's a passionate architect who did his undergrad from BMS Bangalore and a master's degree in architecture and urbanism from MIT. But Bijoy is also known for his sketches and these films that he keeps making with his brother Premjit. And I like to get Bijoy to introduce the rest of the panelists to us and take over, Bijoy.
Great. Thanks, Geeta, Acedge, and IIID Hyderabad. Nandu, thanks for inviting me to have a chat with my mentors, people who inspired me and continue to inspire me as an architect and as a human being. So I had proposed this idea to Geeta just so that we could spend an afternoon together. So an excuse to just hang out and maybe catch up.
Have you all got your beer mugs next to you?
Yeah, Edgar had suggested that that maybe we'd start with cheers.
Right, Bijoy, go on.
So thanks again. Base, when I in the 90s, when I was a student at BMS, the base group, and Nandu's already sort of spoken about them. But there was a group of architects who came together, a very, very diverse group of architects, and they conducted a couple of workshops. And they would have, a lot of events, mostly at Nikhil Arni's place, lectures, and not just architecture, music, or, there would be artists. MF Hussain would, show up. I mean, it would be this really eclectic bunch of people who'd show up and just present work. And there would be sometimes really sort of heated and passionate discussions about things, which as a young architect or as a young student to be part of that, it just sort of opened your mind to, all of the various ways in which one can think about architecture and sort of comprehend this really complex subject. So it was fantastic to have this group and to access all of the, knowledge and wonderful learnings that they had gathered over time. So of course, the group was Nikhil Arni, who's an architect, who's no more with us, but he studied at CEPT. He and of course the story of the origins of the group, I'm going to let the group themselves talk about. But there's Nikhil Arni and Sharad Padalkar, who are no longer with us. Padalkar was also a teacher, but also a practicing architect, just like Nikhil. And then there were the Kanade brothers, Shankar and Navnath Kanade, both of them wonderful practitioners with a incredible overall work. The projects that really impacted us, particularly at that time, was Jalvayu Vihar, which has just been completed, and we saw in Jalvayu Vihar this incredible ability to internalize all of the things that they'd seen, because they spoke about these villages, a lot of them in the north of Karnataka, and the learnings from there. But we saw how an architect was interpreting this information and then deploying it with a lot of abstraction, contemporary work, which still had this incredible connection to the past. So that project really sort of had a profound impact on so many of us. So the two brothers ran Shilp Sindur. The office continues to produce work, and they were also instrumental in devising new ways in which to construct buildings, and everything rooted in this idea of ecology, frugality, and invention. I mean, these three sort of conditions. And I think, we'll talk about it later, but Navnath worked famously at Soleri's, Paolo Soleri's, at Arco Santi. And I think somewhere in that, apart from, of course, his time at Doshi's office, this experience also sort of, I think, brought to bear this idea of ecology and the idea of making buildings that were part of an ecosystem and not just sort of, foreign objects. And then Prem Chandavarkar, who runs Chandavarkar and Thakkar Associates, CNT now, the oldest or the first architectural practice in the city. Seminal practice in a way, all of us have seen the work that the practice has produced, and it has had, really fundamental impact on a lot of us. But I think, of course, the practice, is important in terms of its architectural output. But I think what's really come to bear over the last few years is really Prem's writing and the lectures, and the way that, a lot of us, through his blog and through his writings and his lectures, are seeing the world through that lens that Prem, has put out there. And it's a lens that sort of looks at architecture, society, and culture, rooted in an understanding of equity and justice and democracy. And it's really, especially at these really, Hinduistic times, where we've got all of this kind of nationalism, to see the work of architecture in the light of the larger society. So that's really been a fantastic, for us to access this through Prem's words and his speeches and lectures. And then there's Edgar Demello, who's a celebrated practitioner himself, also has been teaching for a very long time, but also in a very sort of informal way has set up In fact, his office after, Nikki's place, and after the sort of precursor of the Design Friday, Edgar started a sort of gallery at his, just next to his office, which became then kind of the nerve center of critical dialogue about architecture, a place of exchange where a lot of various people came, to discuss things, and it was really, a valuable asset for the city. He also continues to produce artifacts and sort of, these posters and things that are about his understanding and his assimilation of what is going on, across the world in terms of architecture and culture. Edgar's also an incredible travel sort of, he's been traveling widely, and he's been conducting these trips, but again through this search to discover architecture through these travels, which at the heart of it is what, for me, BASE was about, this idea that through travel and observation that you would then internalize certain qualities of architecture. And then Clare Arni, who Nikhil's wife, and also a very, very well-known photographer, who started, and this I came to know only 2 days ago, that she started her architectural photography career shooting the Madurai Club for Jeffrey Bawa. So if you guys have that beautiful white book on Bawa, the one that Brian Brace Taylor wrote, the photographs in that book of Madurai Club are Clare's. And so to start your career at 22, shooting for the great man, this great project, I mean, what better way to begin a career looking at architecture. But Clare also attributes, and we'll talk about this, her relationship to all of these architects and their observations and how that impacts her work. But she's also, like Geeta said, also looking at photography as a way to document marginalized voices and communities, and is currently working on a fantastic sort of survey of South Indian temples in Tamil Nadu. So with that rather elaborate introduction, and I'm sorry for that, but I'll get straight to sort of having this chat with Sanjay, Navnath, Prem, Edgar, and Clare. I just want to, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind, of course, is that we couldn't, even if we were to write a novel or, make up this story, we couldn't get a more diverse group of people from such diverse backgrounds together so apart from the beer and apart from architecture, what is it that sort of got you guys together to sort of start traveling, looking, discussing, et cetera, et cetera? Do you want to go first, Navnath?
First, let's talk about base group. Base group was never formed. It's evolved. It's organically evolved over the period of time, and its roots goes back to the School of Architecture in Hassan. Myself, Padalkar, late Padalkar, and Shankar, three of us were deeply involved in the School of Architecture, and we used to meet every Tuesday just to work out the program for the Hassan School. So discuss and work on syllabus, and that's how it was going on. And just about 5 minutes away. 5 minutes away from our Padalkar's office, there was Nikhil Arni. He used to drop in there, but often. A number of times he came and he found something interesting was going on there. Then he said, it's a great opportunity you have to run the school and given full freedom. So you should do something. I said, of course we want to do something, but you should get involved also. He said, certainly I'll get involved. And then not only I'll get involved, I'll get some other people also there. I says, wonderful, get some people. And then I think he introduced us to Sanjay, Mohe, Edgar Demello, and of course Prem, all known, so that's how we got together. Still then, I think we didn't know it's a base group. It was just a number of persons getting together, Then what happened, the number of chairs in Sharad Padalkar's office were much less than the number of people. So Nikhil Arni, you'll see all the time sitting on the table and talking and all these things. So ultimately Nikhil said that, why don't you shift your venue instead of Padalkar's office, we shift to my house. And that's how we started, base group got together, and whole thing was shifted to his house. Then there, I think we got them involved in School of Architecture as an outsider. They used to come for review, some discussion, give some lectures, talk to the students, and also travel together. I mean, that's how it started, And then at that time, I think I was we were working in working at Gulbarga. We're doing some houses. I used to visit there quite often. So I just went, around and just trying to explore because it's very rich architecture in those areas. So I went and visited various villages there. And one of the villages I found out there, along with one artist, is Bande Gumli. And then we took some slides. Again, I went second time and took some slides and everything. And then I presented in the base group. Everybody was so excited, And then, and then I think the base group, they also wanted to come and see. And then again, I made one more trip and went there. That's how we started. And that's how Mohe happened to be my neighbor, So we, every day evening, we used to meet together. So he also, I think, very keenly interested in traveling. So I think we both of us, we started traveling, and Clare got into it, he joined us, and she had just started her career for photography, if I'm right. And then we started traveling together and some places. And every weekend, I think most of the holidays we used it, traveling. And Clare Arni was a person who, she used to have a huge, that book, about 700 pages, where it says, see India, it is a guide for the India, Indian different interesting places. So she used to check out all the program, where to go, how to go, which budget, what time I'm going to stay, which hotel I'm going to stay, and what is going to be this thing. So that's how I think we started. We started, going from places to place, and and then coming back and again exposing all the slides and everything to the base group. The beautiful thing about base group was that our discussion all the time is pinned down to some visual. We're not talking in the air all the time, So it was a good thing, and there were diverse minds, 6, 7 different opinions. We were coming together and talking about one slide. And it was a tremendous way of learning from, sometimes, of course, it was going there when there was no, there's no slides. We're just talking something. But I think most of the time, I think 70% of our meetings were really something related to visual. So it is almost contextual talk, That's what's beautiful about it.
Right.
Yeah, that's it.
And before we go to Sanjay, I was just wondering, before coming to Bangalore, I mean, I remember we had shot a few, videos with you and with your brother, and he spoke about some early influences, that you had, maybe an art teacher or maybe someone who sort of kind of gave you that inspiration or turned the light on in a way in your head, that maybe this is for me, that this kind of creative activity is something that I can connect to. Is there someone like that? Someone?
Yeah, Shankar used to say, I think he must have, that when he was in high school, I think there was he used to read, the poem was one of the subjects, not in high school, I think it's primary school. So one of the poetry, there was one Picasso's Dove, that one sketch was there. And he really fascinated with the sketch. And that's how Shankar used to say that, I was very fascinated and always interested in art. And from there, it started for him. For me, I think inspiration is partly Shankar, Shankar itself, I just followed him. But also the kind of, from the village, from where I come, when I was in primary school, kind of village, there's no windows, in the village. There's only one skylight about maybe 4 to 6 inches diameter, and the shaft of light will come down. So when I want to read or do something, I just following that light, going around and around. The day, the way is like moving, I also moving around, and maybe indirectly this must have impacted. I'm not sure exactly how it has happened, but something must have happened. Yeah.
Sanjay, just a quick question for you. Navnath has just spoken about these travels that you would make. And of course, we are all very familiar with the kind of drawings and the kind of, the essential place drawing has in the way that you work. On these trips, I mean, what would you do on these trips? Was it, I mean, would you draw? Would you, I mean, what were the trips actually about? I mean, how would you see things?
Well, well, we used to first travel, it all started with Hassan's school taking Bande Gumli as one of their village projects and all, which was introduced by Canades. And we started doing that. But in some of the trips, like I remember one of the trips to Kanchipuram, we decided not to carry cameras. And that was wonderful. And maybe about 10 of us, we had traveled there, and we used to stay in one of these dormitories. Whole day we will go into all these temples, sketch it out, and then come back in the evening and then start discussing how it was and whether this column was in this line, what was it. And then we start comparing sketches with each other. And then sometimes you'll find that, oh, you haven't discovered it. So go next day again and try to correct it. And I think that process was amazing. Once you take a picture, you feel that you have captured it and you forget about it. And sometimes you don't even look back at that picture for a long time. But this process is something which sort of, you never forget it. Once you go through this process of documenting the sketch, try to draw a plan and try to see if there was a little shift in it or where the height was lesser or higher. So that was wonderful. And that's something which we kept on doing consistently. And of course, the photography was always there. And Clare and Navnath both were such accomplished photographers that we would keep coming back and looking at those slides. And that used to be one of the regular features. Almost every Tuesday, we would come and look at these slides and wait for, as Navnath said, it used to be quite, to start with, it was very visual. And then we would get into those arguments.
Yeah, in fact, Prem sent us a transcript of one of your conversations.
Can I just interrupt you?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to say he's talking about camera and sketches. I remember my early days, very, very early days, we couldn't afford the camera. Camera was not available in India. I'm talking about when I was working in Goshi. It's not available. So only thing, you have to go and see the place and sketch it. Sketching means you have to scan the whole building with the eye. Every square inch, every line you have to check it, and then only you can sketch it. So intimacy with the building is much more than seeing through the camera. And when the camera came, I remember it was you could take only 16 slides, 16 photographs or something like that. And it was very expensive, heavy. You have to buy the reel and then have to develop it, and it costs a hell of money. It is not really affordable. So if I go with that camera, there's a box camera, then again I have to see that building again and again because I got only 16 photographs I can take. So I'm seeing going from this corner, morning, afternoon, checking the light and which photograph, because you have to really reassure that which photograph I'm going to take it. So again, your intimacy with the building is much more, not as much as when you're sketching, but definitely, But when it becomes easier, when you get this big camera, which is affordable thing, then actually you start looking at the building. The camera is looking for you, the building, and you're taking the shots and looking at the only pictures. You've forgotten about the building, So sometimes this paucity and this poverty, not affordability, I think sometimes yields you good result, Yes, but, just to take from Sanjay, what you're telling exactly.
Claire, do you have anything to say about that? About photography versus drawing? Do you have a defense?
I couldn't actually hear him. There's some disturbance in the background.
Okay.
There's some, but
no, they were both Sanjay and Navnath were talking. Can you hear me? Is it clear?
Yeah.
Yeah, they were both talking about drawing and sketching, and drawing and photography, and that the act of drawing actually you internalize things, whereas when you have a camera, you kind of don't even look because the camera is doing the looking for you.
I think it depends on your relationship to photography. I used to shoot with a tripod, and I shoot very slowly, and I take time to compose. I don't do any post-production cropping or anything like that. So, you can use photography as a tool in different ways. You can just go and shoot massively, or you can slow down, wait for that moment to come, and then take that photograph then. And hopefully that photograph will be able to tell you, in everything that you want to say. That's the secret of successful photography.
Just to interrupt, I'm sorry, Claire, but there seems to be, I think one of us has both a phone and the computer running at the same time. So can you just check, because there's a lot of echo. So I don't know, Puke, if you can check, and Prem and Edgar, Claire. I don't know if there's anything else on that you know, there's an echo from. So have you logged in on the phone as well? Claire, do you want to speak a little bit about beginnings, about your sort of introduction to this gang of boys?
Sure. I sort of came to Bangalore as a graduate from England. I had done film and media and history of art, and I met Base Group and basically started my career from then. And they've been hugely influential actually on my career. And I've mentioned that quite often in interviews, because at the base meetings, as Navnath was saying, we would, we'd go traveling and then we'd come back and I would show my pictures. And a big important ingredient of the base meetings was having a drink. Let us not shy away from that. And so initially the conversation would be very formal, like yes. And as more and more got consumed, the truth would come out. Navnath would say, what is this? What is this? And so they were hard teachers, and I was very young. I had not learned photography. I'm a self-taught photographer. So it was hugely influential. And sometimes, for many years later, when I was walking around a building, either Navnath's words or other base group members' words would come back in my head as I was shooting. And it would say, look for a continuum of space. Don't just shoot something static, but we want to know from one, that picture, how the space moves from one area to another. And so they were hugely influential, and they were also very truthful. What I loved about the base group was that there seemed to be no egos. Everyone would just say what it was that they felt, and that's what no one said what they thought they ought to say, and that's what I loved about it, was that in the end often there would be a split camp between the Doshi followers and the Korea followers. and I think, oh no, not this again,
Right.
Yeah.
Bijoy, can I just interrupt? I'm sorry. Sanjay, do you have two devices on?
I'll switch off my phone.
If you can, there seems to be an echo and a lot of people are having
Okay.
Thank you so much. Carry on, Bijoy.
Thanks for that, Claire. Yeah, I wanted to come to that question about Korean Doshi, but maybe a little later, because that continues to be a kind of interesting conversation. But I just wanted to pull Edgar in for a minute. This idea of travel, and also the notion that both Sanjay and Navnath spoke about, the idea of drawing and to sort of either make a plan or a section and try to understand the building, not in terms of a pictorial representation, but to actually analyze it through drawing. There's, of course, I'm going to make a very, very sort of gross generalization, but there is, in all of the work, in Shilpa Sindhu's work, in Mindspace, in CNT, in your work, Edgar, there is this real emphasis on the way the section works. And I don't know if that, that is something that you just want to talk a little bit about, that what is the importance of the section and what is the importance of these strips that you made. And I've been to Bendagumdi and to Yadgir, and those buildings are a lot about section and about light, and how the light is brought into that section. So is there something that, I'm trying to make a direct connection, but is there a connection between drawing and this notion of a very rich, and Claire already spoke about it, this idea of a continuum of not static, but almost like Luce would say, something that sort of flowed one to the other sectionally as well. Edgar?
Yeah, before I address that thing about sections that you talked about, I would want to get back to what you mentioned about the diversity of this group.
Right.
You're absolutely right. You know, it just could not be more diverse than that. But I think amongst the group, if I have to now look back, it was Nikki really who was the fulcrum, you know, the node. He sort of had this amazing thing to bring people together, diverse people, obviously. But I think more important than this is that Nikki and I, almost at the same time, were like extending our houses. Both the extensions were on top of our mother's houses. It's interesting, of course, that Prem did that as well, but much later. But I started doing an extension of my mother's house, and 2 years later, Nikki started doing the extension on his mother's house. And there was one base edict that said, don't forget the wall for slides. And I had an 8-foot by 10-foot wall. Nikki had probably a 10-foot by 10-foot wall. And that was the culmination, those two walls in our two houses, that was the culmination of all that we did through the day, through the week, through the month. Actually, we met very often, once a week, if not once in 2 weeks, usually on a Tuesday. I don't know why. But those get-togethers at these houses were seminal stuff. In fact, on one occasion, it was all about curiosity. It's about wanting to know, to actually rip things apart and try to put them together again. And on one occasion, of course, they took it to an extreme. It was Sanjay, I don't know if you all remember this, Sanjay, Navnath, and I don't know whether it was Shankar, I can't recollect now. I had a party at home and we were all there, must have been 30 people. And I'm going to get somebody a drink. And I see these three standing around a broiler chair, right? So, okay, I go to bring a drink, I give it to 3-4 people, I come back again, 15 minutes has lapsed. These guys are still around the broiler chair. So I said, hey boys, what is this about the broiler chair that has become so suddenly so curious? And Navnath says, you know, Edgar, we were trying to see whether there was one component that we could remove from this chair and it would still be stable. Now, I mean, I, of course, laughed my guts out. I said, look, yeah, I mean, that broiler chair was researched for 1 year. There must have been, God knows, 25 models done, mock-ups done, but that didn't stop the group. They still had to discuss something that they felt had value, and then they shared it again with everybody. So I just wanted to bring that first into the whole picture. So it was about these two houses, these two extensions. It was commonly said that we were too poor to buy our sites and build our own houses. So we took the next step that was possible, the free side on top of our parents' roofs. Thankfully, they were all flat roofs and not the popular slope roofs of the time. So that was actually for me, in some sense, how base sort of grew through that. And of course, what's her name? Claire's absolutely right. I mean, rum was the drink of the period, Beer was passé, but rum was no Coke and things, it was water. Anyway, so now coming back to this section, it's very interesting because I don't know, this will come up later, I'm sure Navnath and Sanjay will bring this up. And I will not refer to travels now, I'll refer to a project that we wanted to do. I'll do it very quickly. I think Nikki got this idea. He says, look, yeah, this is international competition. We have to do this competition. Come on, look at the, what do you call it, the people that we have, Let's 7 of us get together and do the competition. The competition was IGNCA. So we said to ourselves, look, we are going to work this in section. And, the usual summer section, winter section, this, that, and the other. So somebody was in charge of planning, somebody in charge of section, somebody is summer, somebody. And I'm only explaining to you how something went awry. So each of us had to do a particular aspect of this project. And then we chose a day, must have been an unlucky Tuesday. They said, Edgar, let's meet at your office, which was in a basement on Double Road, at a nice big wall. Each of us took out what we thought was this very precious thing from a roll. And we said, okay, let's now put the jigsaw together.
Right.
And Sanjay started, and Shankar and Navnath started, I, Nikki, Sharad, and we had this whole thing on the wall. And I can't tell you how profound that silence was. Silence that lasted, I think, 2 minutes, which is a lifetime. And I know who said this. Hey, boys, I think let's just go and get drunk. That's how the project ended. But somebody will tell you the process. I'm sure Navnath, Clare, Sanjay will tell you the process of that project, which was absolutely incredible. So I'm sorry that I brought this section up in a not a very successful way, but somebody else will talk about what you had asked.
Also, Edgar, before I go to Prem, I just wanted to ask you about a sort of seminal memory, maybe from your childhood, something that sort of, triggered your interest in art and architecture or creativity per se.
Yeah.
Do you have something that?
Look, I come from a village in Goa. That village is called Saligaon. And if there was one man who made that village famous, it was Mr. F.N. Souza, the artist. He came from Saligaon, but he went away to Bombay and he studied at JJ and he was promptly thrown out. Then he went to London and he joined the art school there. Again, he was thrown out. He was a born anarchist. So one day when I was, I don't know, I can't remember now, I might have been 12, 13, I went to the house of my, in the same part of the village. He was an uncle of mine and he was a doctor. And he was, I think, related to Souza. And Souza used to give him drawings. And he had a couple of these paintings of Souza. And if I remember right, it goes back, God knows, 60 odd years. It was the Red Road. It's called the Saligaon Blues. It's a strange title for a red road, but just two names, I guess. And that painting just blew my mind, yeah. But I couldn't understand it. So I'd asked the doctor, what is this about? I mean, you're saying it's Saligaon, but I don't recognize Saligaon in this. I don't recognize any part of the village. And then he brought up this word, abstract. Now, look, I am just now saying that I remember it of old. I really can't be sure. But I know him saying that sometimes you must draw what you don't see, not only what you see. And it came back to me many years later when I was in first year. You must draw what you don't see, not only what you see. So that perhaps, I don't know, it's one of the awakenings in me that made me tell my father, no, I don't want to be a chemical engineer. I'll take my chance with architecture. Because people told him, architecture, he'll go into poverty in 5 years. So very well, we all persevered. Here we are.
Prem, coming to you, do you have some memories of the beginnings of your association with the group, memories of those days, those times, and the impact that that's had on you and your practice and the way that you're thinking of things now?
Yeah, certainly. I came back to Bangalore in 1986. And by that time, Base Group was already up and running. So I joined something I was not there in the formative years. I joined when it had already built up its momentum and its character. And actually, if I can tie this into that question you asked about drawing versus sketching. And and the thing about drawing is, our memory is not just in our brains, it's also in our muscles. And we often forget that. And drawing evokes that muscle memory, which perhaps clicking a camera does not to the unskilled photographer.
until a photographer is skilled enough that, they can sort of imagine the body as part of the scene they're framing, but it requires a certain skill to do that. So this thing of engaging the body, which is also why the fascination with section, because the section is actually exploring the body's relationship to space. And I think that was the spirit of the base group, that you didn't abstract anything. It was always that full-bodied engagement, the energy. Right. And if I imagine some of those early meetings where we got together to sort of watch slides, there was, and all of us, you could sense the energy in everyone's bodies and sort of connecting with the visual that we were looking at, sort of as though that was a potential of where one's body could be. And there's a certain energy in that. And I was just thinking, while listening to the earlier discussion, I was recollecting a statement in Alice Walker's book, The Color Purple, where one of the character talks about going to church, and she says, you don't go to church to find God, you go to church to share God. And I think that joy of sharing architecture was a very, that full-bodied sharing was a strong part of the base group. And actually, sometimes the discussions would be so heated. I think it got heated in one of the first discussions I attended, and I thought this group is not going to meet again. They're just going to be enemies after this discussion. But it's like at the next meeting, everything was forgotten, and that same joy would sort of spring up again. And I think that was quite influential on me, because I had just come back from the US and I was doing a lot of reading. I'd done a very theory-based master's, and I was going through a stage in my life, I think, where I was tending to over-intellectualize everything. So I think this my relationship with the base group was the first step in finding that balance.
Right. Yeah, in fact, when, in preparing for this, I dug up an old video that, I had made with MF Hussain some years ago. We had the opportunity to meet him. And he says something really interesting, and it immediately connected back to our conversation yesterday. He said that in my work, of course, I have this legacy because of the progressive arts movement, that, there is this a British style, or there's an international way to do paintings and to think of paintings. There's Andy Warhol, and he mentions all of these names. But he said, for me, I had to find a way to understand who I was and where I am from. And so there were these three things that impacted me. And the first, he talks about the Chola bronzes and the sort of sensuous quality of these artifacts. Then he talks about the Pahadi painting and the color of the Pahadi painting. And then the third thing, he talks about folk. And that's the most important thing for him, the idea that everything has to be communicable, that the folk paintings are a way of storytelling, a way of narrative, that is immediately everybody understands the myth, understands the mythology behind. And in your, as a group, this emphasis on the point of traveling, of going to Bendagumli, for instance, and introducing all of us to Bendagumli is in a way a search inwards, to discover who we are, what our place is, because all of us have this legacy of the Western idioms. We are taught about the history of Western architecture. There's this kind of, that we are trying to fight and break away from that. And this discovery of who you are, I don't know if any one of you want to take that on.
I think it was, I think it was both a search inward and outward. It was a recognition that while there was this inward search, define yourself, there was also a recognition that you're part of something greater than you. And our fascination with the value that we saw in tradition, and whether it was Bendagumli or whether it's Kanchipuram, it's and how to absorb the underlying principles so that you acknowledge that tradition without just trying to imitate it.
Sure.
And it's like Korea talks about transfers and transformations, and you need to search for the transformation rather than the literal transfer. And actually, I think we should also, like Claire mentioned, the fight between the Korea camp and the Doshi camp, but both of them joined in several base discussions, and that was also a wonderful, they were regular. In fact, I think if they ever came to Bangalore, they would always, try and have a get together with base group at that time. So I think they were both influences in very major ways.
Right.
I mean, I used to joke that one camp would call the other camp the children of a lesser god.
Sanjay, I just wanted to bring you in for a quick question about drawing again. And I remember you mentioning, this Khan's trip, in the 1950s, he went to Rome on a trip. And after that, everything changes for Khan. He makes completely different kind of buildings. He's searching for something completely different. And you mentioned something really interesting. You said that sometimes you travel, and then years later, it comes, it manifests in a project. Some memory from something that you saw, drew. You want to say something about that? About this?
Yeah, I'm sure it happens to everyone. And it definitely happens to me that you keep drawing something, keep doodling something. And maybe after 20 years, you are working on a project and you are trying to solve something. And something like, I don't know what, it just comes to you and it seems to fit into that place. And I don't know how it happens. So that's why I keep telling all the students, keep the diary with you. You won't know when it will come to your use, So sometimes you feel that it is why I am seeing it and what is the relevance, where I'm going to apply it. But that time comes which in your subconscious mind, you always, store that information and it keeps surfacing at the right time. So it's important. But one more thing I just wanted to put in the time when we used to meet, the information that we used to get was very limited from the international fund because we used to get these 2-3 American magazines and a couple of European magazines, Architectural Review, Progressive Architecture, and Architectural Record. And we used to wait for those magazines to come. And the moment those magazines comes, all of us would run towards it and look at it. So a lot of debate used to happen because that information, what you get in that magazine was not enough. And one of our teachers had told us that when you see a photograph, try to draw a section. You imagine that section looking at a photograph, you don't have enough information about it. And through that you start discovering and probably you might have invented something new of your own. So, and one advantage with the base group is all these guys had worked abroad, worked with some very well-known personalities. And that information would keep coming in during our meetings. And they had this first-hand information, either working with Soleri or, other people. And when you start that comparison between what we saw, whether in one of these villages, and have that international relationship, at least for me, it was very easy to create that connections between modernism and traditional. And slowly you learn how to interpret those ideas and, create abstraction out of it.
Right. I just wanted talking about, just to the last question on drawing, I promise. This is for Navnath. I remember coming to your office as a young student, and you had this amazing drawing. I think it was on the beam, in the middle of the studio. And I think it was you had done it with that toothbrush technique, no? I think so.
Dry brush.
Yeah, wire brush, and it was a massive section. One of Soleri's, while you were there, I think you made this drawing. But then later on, we also saw this drawing that you made for the Jalvayu Vihar competition, which was you had used a gas torch, etc., to make.
Plywood and gas. Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about the medium and the importance of the choice of what kind of medium you're using to make? What are you trying to express through these drawings, and why are you going to these really alternate ways in which to make representation?
Every medium is good and great. There's nothing. What is dry brush technique? What happens? You can create this extraordinary depth. In the sense, suppose you take a particular picture, you want to show something coming forward or something going back. So whole thing you can make it very, very light. I don't know how to explain this. Very light. Dry brush means you dip in the ink and then again dry it up, you see, completely dry it up. And then you start hitting on the paper, hitting virtually, that sound comes, you know, tuck, 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 you know, like that, you know. And by doing this, you can add so many grades in it, you know, gradation, you know, from very light to very dark, you can make enormous amount of gradation because it depends how much amount of the ink that brush holds, you know, and how much you put the pressure, you know. So that's what is very interesting about it, you know. What is, I don't know how to explain that, you know. This is just, it's a wonderful, yes?
What about the Jalvayu Vihar drawing? Can you tell
No,
us?
that was, I think, that's failure. We tried to do that, you know. Actually, we take the gas, these things, and we want to draw all these lines, you know, building lines and burning with a stove, you know, that thing, you know. But what happened, flame was spreading all over the place, you know. So we couldn't control that, you know. And then we put some Fevicol, you know, Fevicol lines, what do you call them, to stick that line, you know. Put the Fevicol around and this and that, and then we burn the gas. Still, it didn't work, you know. So ultimately, we did partially and gave it up, and again we went back to dry brush technique. That was done in plywood. Yes, yeah. Correct.
I just want to move on now to a question about.
One thing, I want to make one thing clear that Edgar asked me why Tuesday. I didn't know Tuesday because Tuesday was a holiday. It was Sunday day, and we used to take the classes until even weekends also. And that's the reason we used to meet on Tuesday. So Edgar is clear, no, now?
Okay. So many years, I know.
Navnath sir, just to continue on. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Joy, can I just add to what Sanjay and Navnath were saying? You see, the thing about the group was that we were also extremely interested in meeting people who were not in our discipline, as you yourself said. So I would name three to start with. Hussain, like you mentioned, which was an incredible meeting, a quiet man with very few spoken words, but the dynamics of his presence. Pratima Bedi, the dancer, to whose school we used to go at least once a month, perhaps, or maybe once in 6 weeks, to see what's going on. And it was amazing just to meet when Gerard was there and Pratima was there. So we took a lot from just discussions on dance and the spatial aspect of dance, you know, the structure of it. And of course, there was a Japanese engineer who came in, you know, once at some conference, and we somehow pulled him into the gallery. And it was amazing. I mean, you know, his mind with how much you can do with so little. I really impressed us. But what I'm trying to get at is that we took this thing of being not influenced, but being sort of exposed to architecture, to magazines, to this, that, and the other, into the other domain, to the other disciplines. And I now pay a lot of attention and stress with my students to tell them that, look, ideas can come from everywhere. They come from within and they come from outside. And they don't necessarily have to come from a building. It's better that they don't. They can come through, like Nadi Gandhi, for instance, has said, I read in a magazine about 30 years ago, that he was so influenced by Birju Maharaj, you know, the Kathak dancer. And his performance on stage created a sense of spatial, what do you call it, a periphery. It had structure, it had rhythm. And that's why his architecture became partly structured and partly organic, if you look at the work of Nadi Gandhi. So like that, you have even, people like, what's his name, that American who did the Stiletto House. It came from a piece of music, you know, from Bartok, 4 movements, 2 solids, 2 voids, 2 transparent, 2 opaque. So we began to also talk about things like that. So it crossed the borders of our discipline and went into other disciplines.
You know, in many years, I'm really grateful that we had those formative years in the days before the internet, because we had this hunger for discovery and sharing, and we could only do it in this very genuine way of connection. So whether it was all of us huddled around a magazine looking at a building and trying to reconstruct its section, or whether it's meeting the kind of people Edgar was referring to, and it was, I mean, there was a scarcity of information. So each encounter was sort of carefully savored and digested. And I believe that that kind of discovery perhaps is lost in this era where, you know, you have this surfeit of information coming at you so easily that you just treat everything quickly and superficially. So it was a very important era, and I think because of that, some of us still try to cling to that mode of discovery, even though other modes of discovery are possible. But I'm concerned that a generation who has not experienced that era is that sort of highly valuable mode of exploration and discovery seems to be lost.
Can I say one thing?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, I guess we talked about, you know, the Hussein who came. Claire got a great compliment from Hussein, one of the slides. Claire, can you remember that?
No, I don't remember.
Hey, you got a slide from Anandpur. Anandpur villages were there.
Yes,
Sanjay,
yes.
Can you recall that, Sanjay?
No.
Anandpur, one village slide was there.
I remember the picture.
No.
I remember the
Slide,
picture.
But I don't remember the comment. No.
Yeah.
No.
He said even Picasso cannot think like this.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I remember that. That was that
That's
one
why I
line.
tell you, Claire, you don't remember. You got
I don't remember.
Yeah.
Very funny.
I do remember.
And I remember that.
It was that white line around the column.
Exactly. You know, what was that? Was just a mud wall that a rounded coping on top. And they have only two colors. No, one is kabi and other is lime, you know, that white color. They go all around the openings and the doors and the niches and everything. And some color will be left out. And it's not enough for the whole wall, you know. So they used to climb on top parapet, they pour that color. And it starts trickling down, you know, trickling down there. The slide. I don't know if you recall that now. You can't recall that? I remember
I
it.
remember what you said. I remember.
No, I think what it did is to taught us way of seeing things.
Yes, sure.
And it was very important, you know, the importance of just one blank wall with buttress or like this white color going through or the light, you know.
Sure.
So these were sort of visual images which just made us rich.
Yes,
And when I was photographing, I would be off on assignment somewhere, maybe for an NGO or something, and they would say, take pictures in the villages around, and then you have to come back and show them to us. So I had this sort of tension, you know, that this whole gang are going to meet, and so I have to make good pictures. So even though that wasn't an assignment, I would go and shoot all this vernacular architecture. And then what happened, the HUDCO, if anyone wants to take that up, the HUDCO housing thing happened for, the lower income group. And so then they would want to look at my pictures even more to see those spaces. I don't know if you want to talk about that, someone, the HUDCO thing.
Was this a joint, did all of you work on this together, or were they separate projects for the HUDCO? Separately?
We worked on projects separately, but we all collaborated to help produce that book, Mohe.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Clear, but you have to find out that slide and put in puja room, and you should worship it. Hussein's comment, write the comment, you know. So that's it. And it's such an important slide. I don't know how could you forget that. So I got such a strong memory of that, you know.
Actually, I just want to make maybe a closing thing on this thing of travel and watching slides and how it hit us in the face once. And it made us, jump out of our skins, you know, and open our eyes. Doshi, of course, was a great well-wisher. So was Charles of BASE. And only thing Charles didn't like the idea that it would be the BASE School of Architecture. So he didn't like. He thought BASE was something, you know, base, you know, it's ugly. And anyway, that's another story. But the thing about, I've just lost my thread. Yes, Doshi sent one of these very well-known French Parisian architects, Henri Siriani, who was an incredible guy. So Siriani came for a meeting of some engineers, and he had some slides with him that were not, he said himself, worthy to show engineers. So he brought them to show these friends of Doshi in Bangalore, this very excitable group that he called them. So I don't know if you remember it, Sanjay. I'm sure we'll never forget this. So it was Nikki's house, and we were 25 people, and Mr. Siriani came in. Somebody brought him there. And there we were with our chests out, trying to show Mr. Siriani our rural and our indigenous architecture, our folk art, our intuitive working with material. And so we thought that, that was the be all and the end all. So we took about half an hour to show him this. And he had a little black box with him that he kept next to his chair. I think his chairs were rather low. You were almost sitting on the floor. So he kept this thing next to him. And then when it was over, there was a big discussion. Nikki went a little thing about the white man and this and about this legacy and that. So he was not rattled. But he said, hey, is that all that you're showing me? He says, yeah, I mean, do you have things like that in your country? Look at our, 3,000, 5,000 year old traditions and this and that. He said, hold it. My dear boys and girls, what they were, he said, this, what you've shown me, you see in every country in the world. You'll see it in Africa, you'll see it in Europe, you'll see it in South America, you'll see it in Australia. Now show me what you've done with this. And then he got up. If you can't, please, who's dropping me back? He got up with his black box and he wanted to leave. And then we all got, that's when it hit us in the face. Said, look, what are we extolling, our heritage? He's not come for that. He's come, he's a modernist. He wants to know more, not just that. But we were showing it to him with a certain hubris, Then finally, common sense, goodwill prevailed, and he took that box and he opened it. And after that, you remember, no, Sanjay, he mesmerized us.
Yes.
With 45 minutes to 1 hour of the work that he did in Paris, including that museum of the First World War. That was a classic. So sometimes we used to get very over-enthusiastic with what we were doing and what we were all rediscovering. For many, it was discovering. For me, it was a discovery. For many, it was a rediscovery. But we were taking it literally, and that's one day when we said, hey,
Yeah, I just want to add one thing. He showed that war memorial, and he had this concrete curved wall, and there were small projections in that concrete wall, and with a shadow falling. And he said it's about the war memorial,
Memory of
sorry.
War museum.
Memory of soldiers.
Yeah. But he was talking about the graves, the army graves that you see, and these small projections onto the wall. And I couldn't relate to it that time. And after years, I was driving in Pune, and then Pune there is this cemetery, where all soldiers are. I looked at it. It was, the shadow falling onto the ground and all these rectangles placed, at a certain distance. And without knowing it, it just connected with me, with that building. It was such amazing thing to create that connection after so many years. When you see something familiar and you connect it with that building. I mean, I was quite astonished that the power of that one slide and with that shadow and just those small projection, how much it can connect.
Right.
I remember very well Sanjay telling me this, when I come from Pune, the cemetery.
I
remember that you're telling the Syrian is that wall, the little spikes were coming out, the shadows were there. Exactly same experience I got. Instead of vertical line, it was a horizontal thing, but it was and the afternoon shadows were falling deep, and I suddenly remember those. I remember that very clearly.
I think that's what that abstraction is all about. How you unknowingly connect certain things.
Right.
Yeah, correct.
I don't know if you guys want to take a short break. I thought we'll go through a few photographs. We've thanks to Claire, and she's taken time out and searched for some pictures. So I've just put together a quick group of pictures from the 80s and 90s. So we'll just quickly take a look at them. Maybe you guys want to say what you remember maybe from these trips. So let me know if the presentation is visible.
Oh yeah.
It's a great poster, Bijoy. Bijoy.
Yeah, Anup Bhatt made it. Yeah, it's
Wonderful poster.
Utsav House, no? Utsav House.
This is Utsav House.
This is
Yeah.
the
Utsav House.
Yeah.
Here's the actual photograph.
Yeah, the Utsav House.
Those who don't know what is Utsav House, this was shot in a Utsav movie.
Utsav movie,
which is
Hindi
old.
movie. Sham Benegal, isn't it?
In which actually Rekha was
Yes, yes.
dances in that court.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right.
Utsav House. This after coming to Hassan, we went to this Utsav House. You remember that?
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
We stayed in overnight in Hassan in school. We gave some talk and everything, and next day we went to Utsav House.
That particular column had a place to keep a gun.
One gun was there, huh?
Yeah.
Rifle, I think.
Rifle.
Open that column, you know, because the rifle was placed.
We went to lots of the Malnad houses. There are lots of them like this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Mm.
There's Sanjay, young Sanjay.
This is a Goa trip, Goa.
Manik's.
Manik's man.
Yeah, Manik's a man.
Every now and again, Manik would say, "What a country! What a country!"
He could sketch
Yeah,
so well, huh? Amazing
well.
sketching and using left hand.
No, he was a left-hander. I must tell you the story. He was a left-hander.
You know, what you know?
I was doing a
Yeah. He was in CNT.
yeah, I was doing a competition, which many others did as well. And I got Manik to my office and said, "Look, I want 4 perspectives done, hand drawn, left with a T square and Z square, and freehand." But I said, "Look, Manik, no beggars, no lepers, no sadhus, not this." So he said, "Okay." He started drawing, and there he had one guy with Tamil script on the wall. Huh? He just imagined something and he put it there. Behind this, in front of this was a leper. So I said, "Look, I told you no, with that typical thing on his arm." He said, "Oh, no problem. I forgot about it. I'll change it." He changed it in 15 seconds to Corbusier. Yeah. On the sidewalk. That was Manik. Manik's.
This is a great photograph.
That is Govind, no? Govind is there.
Yeah.
Suchitra, Govind. I have taken this photograph, I think.
Yeah.
This is my photograph.
On a picture, yeah.
These are by Navnath, not me.
Yeah, I remember. Humpy.
Navnath's picture.
Yeah.
It seemed like some uniform, huh, this base group.
Yeah. White shirt and beige pants. Yes.
Lovely picture. What would Nikki have looked like today?
Yeah, this Clare was saying that maybe the person who's taken the picture is standing in the water somewhere.
Actually,
in the middle of the tank.
Hey, Pippa is there. Your Pippa. Dog.
Yeah.
Actually, Sanjay is also in this picture, but I think it's behind these slides.
You can reorganize it, Edgar. On the top right, there's a bunch of icons.
Okay.
Yeah. Just press one of those and it'll change.
Actually, this was
your white Fiat, Navnath?
What's that?
That white Fiat is yours in the back.
Yes.
Maybe could that's fair.
That's his.
My car was very useful for base.
This
Actually,
is
All the time traveling in Fiat car, huh?
We used to go and stay in this temple.
Yeah.
And Navnath had taken one very long shot, almost 15 minutes exposure in the night where these
Stars are moved.
then the earth had moved and all the stars looked like lines. You remember, Navnath?
I remember
Yeah, I
that.
remember. And there Shankar Narayan was sitting for 5 minutes. He got tired, He couldn't have patience. He walked away, And the photograph came like a ghost, It's not fully exposed, It was very interesting. We showed that slide to Doshi. Doshi was amazed. I mean, he said, "What is this?" He couldn't understand what it is. And I said, "Stars are moved and everything." Yeah.
Is that your dog, Claire?
Huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
your dog on the left.
Yeah, that's our dog called Pippa. And this is a very beautiful place in Sringapatna on the banks of the Kaveri River. that no one really knew about these places, but my parents had taken me as a teenager, and now, of course, these places are ruined and it's full of tourists. But in those days, no one was here. Be quiet, and you had the river snaking off in the distance, very tranquil.
This dog has visited IIM also so many times along with us.
Yeah, you remember drinking beer when in the IIM when it was under construction.
Middle of the night.
Yes.
It was a full moon.
In this pavilion.
Yeah.
Clare, Nikhil, Navnath and Shankar.
Yeah. This, I think, in front of your house, the temple behind.
In front of the house. Where
Yeah, this Pippa is there again.
Yeah.
In front of your house, correct, yeah.
And someone stole the gate. One night they just took the gate and went off.
Now you're looking like a rock star, man.
But that's Nikki's pose, huh?
Usual posture.
Pose, I think the Clare also adapted.
Like that Mysore one also, exactly the same pose.
Clare also adapted the same pose. You can see that.
There he is. Same pose.
Oh, hey, where is this? What you call here? Where is this?
Mysore.
Hadko.
Oh, yeah. Hadko.
Tell us who's in the picture, Edgar.
Hadko tape, yeah, correct.
This is Hadko.
Yeah.
That's Hadko.
Mysore.
That's Mohan. Mohan is on the left. Mohan Bopaya and
Padalkar on the right.
Yeah.
And Demello. Who's tallest here? Demello, you're taller than Nikhil? No, it's not.
I'm standing higher, I think.
Look at Edgar here.
Look at that, yeah.
I can't imagine. And look at Mohan with all that hair.
This is in your place.
This is our house.
Your place, yeah.
Who is this?
Chandru Iyer.
Chandru
Dubey
Iyer.
is there.
Oh, yeah.
Anil Dubey is there.
Dubey is there, yeah.
Yeah.
And Ranjit.
Ranga.
Ranjit, yeah.
There's,
It's a great photo.
so
You
all of
could see the rum.
around this
See the
table.
rum?
You can see the rum.
And that table was made out of an old door.
Okay.
And you had to make sure that you didn't put too much weight on one side. The whole thing would tip up because it was not attached.
Oh, yeah. It's a bit...
And a few pictures of Bendagumbli. I thought maybe we'll just take a Prem had sent these yesterday.
I think it's not Bandingoli. It's
yeah.
Wow.
This is not Bandegumli. The next one is.
It's not Bendigoble.
This is Bendagumbli.
Yeah,
This is Bandingoli. This is Bandingoli.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. What a beautiful place, no?
Nice.
Lighting.
That previous one is that Ravi Kiran or something, no? Village name?
Yeah.
Andani's village. Yeah.
And then, yeah, Kirangiri.
Kirangiri. Okay.
Kirangiri, correct. This is Kirangiri, correct.
This is all Shahabad kind of stone.
This is Bandingoli.
This is where you start drawing sections, what you were talking about.
Yeah. That's Sumitra there, I think, sitting.
Yeah.
See the water system, no? Remember that? There's a well and it faced the water.
Yeah. Cantilever toilet in the first floor.
There's water, no? There's a well there, you know? Next to
There
Channel.
was a toilet which was cantilevered, like a box, with a hole in the floor.
On second floor.
And three sides, so with a door and open to sky.
Yeah, I also put together a few images of these things that you were talking about. Navnath, you were talking about those drawings, Picasso's drawings of the dove.
Oh yeah, correct. I think the most part of the middle drawing, that's Shankar was talking about.
Two lines to depict lightness and air and flight.
Yeah.
And some images of Arthasanti. What was your experience like there, Navnath, at Arthasanti?
Well, I think initially I think Solari is where I've written something. No, basically is a more Ethiopian and futurist architect. So there's more of theory and more of drawings than really doing building. So it was quite interesting because he was thinking of the city as a 3D instead of making it a two-dimensional city which sprawls all over acres and acres and be miles and miles together. He said, why can't we bring it together and make a 3D structure instead of that? So he wanted to make it a completely self-sufficient city in the sense self-sufficient in food, energy, no movement, no cars, no that way. So he proposed some greenhouses below and some solar energy, and the hot air will come. I mean, the cool air will come and it will get heated up in the greenhouses, and then it let it go into the building. So something like the whole idea. This is all theoretical thing, but it's quite exciting to work. Very interesting to work. And this is the only, I think, experimental structure. It started in 1970, and I went there in 73 or something like that. It's just not this portion was not done really. So yeah, it's quite interesting to work.
And where you stayed, that was amazing, right?
Huh?
Where you stayed, that was Kosambi.
I know what you want to say.
Yeah.
I know what you want to say.
Yeah, that was amazing.
No, there's just cubicles, This I think.
No, I'm not. I'm talking about that entire
bathroom, huh?
I knew what we were coming to, but so I was talking about all those handmade quality of structures.
Oh, you're talking about the constructions, eh?
Yeah.
Oh,
Kosambi, right?
I think Kosambi. I think he's the only person in the world possibly that he casts the roof first and then he puts the supports underneath. That Sanjay, no.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what he does here, partially is structures are underground. I'm talking. That's what we are talking about Kosambi. It's partially underground. And what he'll do, he'll bring a heap of the silt. He put the silt on top, shape the way you want. You can shape you can make the vault out of it. You can make triangle. You can make all kinds of shapes. Some silt, you just shape it. And then he'll do a lot of carvings of that. And sometimes he applies some colors. And then he put the reinforcement and over the concrete, initially very thin concrete, lean and thin. And then full concrete, now the roof is ready. There's no support. Support is the earth itself, because both things was stacked over earth. Then you start breaking the corners. You go in the corner where the support is needed. Then from top, you start digging underneath. Then you put the foundation and raise the wall. Which will go and touch the roof on top. Like this, you keep on digging. Go deeper and deeper and deeper, and then whole thing will be excavated. And the structure is ready.
Wow.
You understood? And then in turn, whole idea when I talk about silt, you get the texture of the silt and texture of the colors, you see in the ceilings and all some of the columns if you have. So it's just interesting technique. Yeah.
I wish there were pictures of that. Actually, those were amazing.
Yeah, I got in the office.
When I was in college in SPA Delhi, Paolo Soleri came to give a lecture. And he just come that morning from Kolkata. And he was quite shaken. He said that all my life I've been preaching high density. And yesterday I found out for the first time what it really is. He was fascinated by the pawn shops. He said someone operating a business out of 1 cubic meter.
You also said
that's why he decided to come to Pondicherry.
You also
that's right.
You also said that he gave the slideshow. And he was facing the slides and not the audience, right?
That's right.
Yeah, I remember you telling me. Yeah, correct. Yeah, Edgar, you want to say something?
In fact, I don't know.
Saying that after I heard him in Pondicherry. Obviously, that was the same. And it was in the French Quarter. And then he suddenly realized, now the density has lessened. In Auroville, sorry. Not in
Auroville.
I found something very strange about Soleri. He sat on a chair with his back to the audience, looking at us.
What Navnath was saying. Yeah.
That's what I was saying. Yeah.
Oh, I see. Okay, then hear that.
No, that's Prem told me. Yeah.
Also, Navnath, I also, want to make a connection between this experience that you had and money and this exercise to find a construction that was,
So your audio is not clear.
expensive, affordable. You can't hear me?
Yeah, there's some problem.
Is it better? Is it better?
Yeah, now it's okay.
There was a lag, it's fine now.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to ask you about the construction technique that you had evolved for Kerimani and for some of the buildings, and if this experience at Arco Santi had an impact on how you were thinking of construction and building to make it more, quicker and more less expensive.
Yeah, frugality. To be frugal, I think something I learned because of our life itself. We come from village, and not very. So we have to be frugal throughout our life. And then when I went and worked with Sulari, he was much more frugal than what I was. In the sense he didn't like to. Even he sees clothes, he's always a half pant, and not even wearing the shirt. He just because as per climate he was. So yes, to a certain extent that's true because being how to make everything economical. So when you did this technique, I think Bangalore, that all footpaths and everything used to be in stone slabs. And if you go outskirts and somebody is putting his boundary wall or something like that, he'll just put the temporary boundary, he'll put the vertical stones and everything. Then we're thinking that, why people are doing this? Because they are doing it because the cheapest material available. And then we thought that why it cannot be used in the building. And the component of the wall is more expensive than any other thing. If you take the basic shelter, take the floor, wall, and the roof. I think what is the maximum cost was in the wall. So we decided to use in the wall, and that's how we started with a new technique. Yeah, we use a stone slab as a walling material. Yeah.
Yeah, there's also, I don't know, is it clear? I'll just, also this sense of building as a community, that you build together. So I don't know your relationship with the contractors. It seems like there is actually a guild at work, that there's a group of people working together. And Kerimani for me stands.
They were all friends, They're friends, and each one has different requirements. So you have to fulfill the requirements. I think what is good thing about Kerimani, it has very strict structural system. So it means this something doesn't vary, it is fixed. But something that is variable, the spaces are very variable, So it is there's a combination of something rigid system, but variable spaces. So I think each house encroaches into other house in order to occupy that additional space if required. So I see in the plan as well as the section, they are all interlocked houses. They get interlocked because sizes are varying. And I think basically, the whole project was directed by 2 or 3 things. One is lake on one side, other side was sloping, is going down. Third is strict structural system. Fourth is that view, lake view, which is to be given to, and try to share the system because it was 90 feet long, and 6 people are involved. So we are given each one 15 feet. But as per requirement, there's little adjustments, a little encroachment, and this is little interlocking takes place. So I think that's how it. And then again, one more problem was there. All the toilets has to be towards the road. It cannot be towards the lake. So there are so many restrictions there. And still, I think you could. I think this project says that you can have strict structural system, economical house, and still you can make the variation. So it fulfills the requirement of all the 6 persons, 6 plus 2. I think there are 2 other units right there on top. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great example of how, just in terms of sensitivity to the location, but also this idea of frugality and the community coming together.
Yeah, the whole idea that community never worked because nobody came to stay there.
No, I'm talking about the contractors and you and inventors.
Yeah, we're working at it. Just the supervision. I think we do the supervision. So we put for supervisor there. Gather and getting the work done. Yeah. This is not profit project.
Also, just to segue a little bit to you, Prem, we had a chat yesterday about, the importance of, writing and thinking about architecture. And I just pulled together a few of the books that you've, spoken about previously. I just want to know how you see, as an architect, I mean, if you were to generalize, what's the importance of thinking, in a way abstractly about, larger issues, and then sort of, having that impact the way you work? I mean, where did you find this impulse to write and to sort of, offer observations on generation?
The impulse to write came from my master's degree, where I did a written thesis, and the idea of theorizing. And to me, it's extremely important to always step outside yourself and look at yourself with critical rigor. And in a way, I think, looking back in hindsight, I wish that was something that the base group was able to make that step. We tried it. We tried formalizing as a trust. We started conducting these workshops. After that Henry Siriani episode that Edgar talked about, we said, oh, we must get into critique. We should actually show our own work and subject it to critique from the group. But somehow those things never happened. We started conducting workshops, but that also petered out. But so I think that idea of critical rigor, there was a lot of critical energy, but I think critical rigor was something that we could have really carried forward, and it would have taken it to a new level. Palasma has actually been an influence after my base group days, and I've had the privilege of getting to meet and know him and actually converse with him also. And Korea was an influence from the base group days, having attended many discussions at base group also. But I think I wouldn't be a different person if I was not able to write. And I think the writing has to have as much rigor as the designing. And you have to be able to move back and forth. And it's not that one forms the foundation for the other, but it's each critiques the other, and that internal critical conversation, I think, is hugely important. And I think that's something that we need to work on in India, because we don't have a culture of criticism. We don't have a culture of rigorous journalism that goes beyond just being descriptive. And it would be really great if our schools could start propagating this in a sort of more rigorous manner.
I realize that this probably is going to be a whole other kind of conversation, probably much longer. But do you have, I mean, a very quick reaction to the situation that we are in now in the context of our profession, with the COVID and with this kind of condition? How are you seeing that's going to impact, that moving forward? I mean,
I think it's going to have a huge impact, and actually I'm trying to use this time in the lockdown to reflect on that. I think, and to see how we should transform as a practice within CNT. I think going ahead, architects have to go beyond using design to give form to an experience, and actually use design as a way of strategizing a future. And that requires bringing in some more skills. It requires bringing in research as in a more rigorous way as part of the practice. I'm not talking about academic research. I'm talking about practice-driven research. I think it involves learning how to jointly strategize with others. So we are working with teams in the client, not just on the client side, but also other thinkers to sort of reinvent. So like, for example, we've just launched a research project within CNT saying the future of the workplace when half your employees are going to be working from home. How is that going to change it? So I think those kind of questions are going to become hugely important.
Thanks, Prem. Yeah, I think it's anyway, lots to talk about. Edgar, I discovered, I found this online, the Red Road that you talked about, an image of Saligaon. Thanks for sending me a link. I just thought I'd pull it up to rekindle your memory. But I wanted you to talk about Alto Fanaik a little bit, and about your experience having been abroad and of course coming back to India, and within the base group looking back at our own traditions. how do you see making this bridge between a Western education and this exposure to the West and coming back and practicing here? I mean, how do you make that bridge personally?
See, for me, I was at Delft, and at the time, the teachers at Delft, at least 2-3 of them, one was Van Eyck, one was Hetzberger, not so much Piet Blom, but I think these two, I mean, they were almost a breakaway group from the sort of conventional modernists. In fact, they had a very big problem with them because Van Eyck always talked about humanism. You know, he was really a humanist architect, and that actually struck a chord in me. You know. The fact that, a lot of his buildings had the same approach. They had the same materials. I mean, if the building changed, it didn't necessarily mean that the material changed. And that's why when I came back in the first few years, you know, I started to do a lot of work in exposed concrete blocks. Like, you know, the Kanades did it in granite, Chapti stone. And I did 3 projects that were not, I mean, around the same time. One was this, what do you call it? It was called Nammane. It was, I think the base group had seen it in one of our workshops.
That's good.
It was a place for rag pickers. It was a home and a place for them to stay. It was their classrooms and their dining, and they could come and go at will, the boys. Now, when I did that, it was a very successful building. And thereafter, I got to do a building for one of these big, what do you call it, the NGOs, I think it was called Action Aid, their MD. And I used the same material, I used the same language. And I found that, look, you know, what Van Eyck was really talking about is, I mean, you know, material can have a humanizing effect, you know, somehow, when it's used truthfully. And then I took it even further, a little later, with the house of Vasudev. The artist, S.G. Vasudev. Again, I went back into this thing about exposed concrete blocks. And how does one express the block, its coursing, jointing, how does concrete meet it? But then there came a stage in which I said to myself, for better or for worse, that I somehow started to align with the idea of a white wall. And my own upbringing, you know, in a very hybrid nature of my village and Goa. And this whiteness is one of the few things that struck me as important. And slowly, you know, maybe, I don't know, maybe I found my own voice or whatever, nothing new, but I went away from it. I went, you know, and of course, you know, exposed concrete blocks bring a whole lot of problems with it, you know, porosity to start with. And in fact, Vasudev, we had to give a paint coat over it. It was really ironic of he being an artist, a painter. We had to paint his brick wall, I mean, his block walls. So for me, what I got from Van Eyck and Hetzberger was really that humanism, you know, with which we had to work. And he always said, you know, because they were students from Africa, from India, says, you are the people. And he was a great thing of African prehistory. He had a beautiful collection of artifacts from Africa. He says, that's, you know, it's for you all now to go back and take this thing of humanism because it's more important in your countries. It's important everywhere, but so that was, you know.
Not just architecturally, Edgar. Humanism, not just architecturally, but just in every sense. No, in the way that
that's true. Yeah, it transcended. Of course, it transcended architecture. It was a way of life. You know, it was. That's why these people were at a time. You know, this Team 10 and that Siam and all. It was a breakaway. You know, because the others believed in another form of you know, heroic. What do you call it? Modernism. These guys were not into the heroics of things. They were into people.
Bijoy, I just want to say something. You know, I remember it when Edgar was talking about technology and material, and I designed the first building that Infosys built, and they were funding this building from their IPO, and they're a company that has this traditional South Indian Brahminical fear of debt, and
fear of
debt, getting into debt. So it was the first time they were actually borrowing in a way because it was funded through their IPO, which was undersubscribed, hard to believe now. So they put a very rigorous cost limit on the building. So I was trying to see how one could do this frugally. And then I thought of the Chapdi Kallu system that the Kanade brothers had developed. So I thought, hey, maybe this is scalable and maybe we can apply that same technique to a 2 lakh square foot office complex. So I went to Shilpa Sindur and I had a chat with Navnath and Shankar, and I said, this thought has occurred to me, what do you think? And they were sort of really excited about it, and they said, yeah, let's try it. And the way they shared, I mean, here was a technique that they had developed and you know, was a signature of their work. And they had no sort of proprietary sort of possessiveness about it or something. They just sort of just shared it and said, you're free to use it. And they advised me through the process. And I think that was a strong part of the spirit of the base group, that there was no possessiveness about anything. If one person had an idea, it belonged to all.
Great, thanks. Edgar, I'll just move on to Sanjay. Sanjay, you know, recently there was a wonderful chat with Gayatri Shetty, and of course, you know, in numerous interviews, and you know, you speak a lot about Doshi and particularly about IIM Bangalore, and you've also had the chance to work in the past with you know, Charles Correa. Can you tell us a little bit about you know, what this project particularly means to you, and how you look at these two figures as sort of foundational figures in your trajectory as an architect?
Well, we used to refer to them as gods, and most of the time, Nikki would get a phone call from Doshi or Korea, and then we'll say that, oh, God is coming tomorrow, and we would get all, and we'll ask which God. So that's something which used to happen regularly, because at that time both were Doshi was doing IIM and Korea was doing his house in Koramangala. So IIM has been a part of base group all the time, and Doshi used to come almost every month or every 1.5 months kind of thing, and we would have these meetings. So we just saw this whole building coming up right from the beginning, and first time, you know, seeing that that pergola and that kind of scale, it was like an encyclopedia of spaces. So you would just come there, go there, and then try to understand how to put together this. There's so much of structured kind of presence, but still has an abstraction to it. So that combination, control over the light and all, that was quite amazing. And of course, Korea, I mean, in terms of his ideas and all, was something which we always referred to. Actually, that book of Korea's, the first one, which I think every student must have. That used to be the most referred book during those days. The first one, you know, so which had these hand-drawn sections of different small houses, big houses, and that way, if you look at it, that house of Maskarana's house, which is in Cambridge layout, that also had a huge influence on me, because it's just that blank wall. You just open the door and you will see the way that space opening up with this large lawn behind. First time when I saw it, that was quite a big shock, and said, I mean, this is the way to handle a house. So learning from all these things, it was a continuous process. And as Claire said, we debated Korea and Doshi almost in every meeting. We never knew that I would get a chance to do a work in this building. And earlier I had done extension to Korea's work in JNC, but there was not so much of attention because it's more kind of a spontaneous work. But here it is so structured. When you look up at the ceiling, every beam, every column is all tied up. You know, there is such a strong geometry to it. So it was scary to even make a start. But that's the time we met Doshi once, and I remember it was in a dhaba somewhere. The whole base group had gone there, and then he said, no, just don't worry, just do what. Even if you want to put a shimmering glass and want to reflect the building into it, please go ahead. You know, and you know the way that itself gave so much of confidence that you know he's he's encouraging you to do something rather than trying to put restriction onto you. Don't do this, don't do that. And that made a big difference. So there is a continuous learning when you do this building, and probably this is one of the buildings which has aged most gracefully. The more you go there, the better it looks. Every time you go there, I go there almost every month probably, but to do some work or something or other. But every time you discover something which is made out of just one material almost. You just have these gray blocks, gray flooring, and exposed concrete, and this whole drama happens within that. So there's so much to learn, and it's kind of, you keep discovering.
Navnath, do you want to say anything about your experience at Doshi's office and maybe reflect a little bit on IIM Bangalore and its meaning to you?
Well, I already, last time we met Doshi, I already told you, what kind of experience I had. And there's a lot of things, First of all, when I graduated, my education was not good. And to give a single example, when I was in second year, that's the time I think Chandigarh was just built. We're talking about early 60s or so. And all over the world, I think countries are on the forefront, and everybody's talking about it. I had one teacher who came to my board, and he said, Corbusier doesn't know how to sketch. And it just happened. He got one felt pen, it was very impressive, and he said, sketches should be done like this. So just imagine what kind of education we have gone through. One wonderful thing about once I graduated, I knew that I don't know anything, and therefore I want to learn. That was the attitude. I couldn't even speak proper English those days, You have to really make a sentence and think about it and how to speak and how to make the, only thing I think what was good about it, only two assets which I had is the drafting and doing some sketches. That helped me. That's the only reason Doshi retained me, I'll tell you. There's no other reason, why you shouldn't. And also I was working hard there, you see. So while working, I was attentive because I was not talking much. I was just very attentive what was happening in the, and the office was, about 6 or 7 people there working. There was one peon whose name was, I think, Yusuf. There was one Berawala, there's one typist, and 6 of us, and the one carpenter was there. We used to call him Kaka. And he was a 60 years old, very, very thin man, and wearing that typical Saurashtra, what do you call that, turban, which is compressed underneath, and then one bidi, It's quite an interesting thing. And Doshi, believe me, I'll tell you, reveals a few things. Doshi at that time, he had smallpox on the face. I don't know if you know. Do you know? Smallpox. They're distinctly visible on the face those days, And anybody coming, to the office, in case Yusuf is standing and Doshi is standing, people will take Yusuf as the Doshi, So such was, the kind of impact Doshi had those days. And just imagine those days, Charles Corday used to come there. And what a personality he has, he's about 6 foot tall and fair looking and having a chairman or one cigarette without filter. That's, what is that, yellow packet, Hathi, some elephant was there on top, that packet. He used to come there and white shirt and white pant and no belt, nothing, It was just such an impressive personality. And there I see the Doshi there. In the beginning, when I went there, Doshi was wearing only khadi. How the khadi holds your body, everything once he put in there, it is all over the place. It's really, and little small little tummy, I mean, maybe I'm overstating it, but a small, so he has to tie this, pant, around this. And there was a Korean, there you can see the Doshi, such a contrasting figures, It's very, very interesting. These are the kind of observations that they forget about it. But what I learned from Doshi is, I may repeat what I said last time, should I?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Please go ahead, sir.
Yeah. No,
yes.
Yeah, I'll just tell, Doshi gave one sketch, about one house is to be done. And he did the sketches, everything was worked out, and I was supposed to draft to the scale. So I was, sincerely working hard and everything. Up to 2-3 hours he came and everything was drawn, and correctly drawn. It was precise and correctly drawn and everything. And Doshi comes and looks at the sketch and he doesn't say anything, and then looks at for some time. Suddenly he tells me, you should know what you're doing. Now, at that time, I'm completely confused. I did the drawing, which is correct. What he wanted, he got it. And still he tells me, you should know what you're doing. And it really confused me. So I said, why am I so bad or what, And then he said that, why do we do these drawings? Why do you do these sketches, sections, and elevations? Why do you build the models and everything? Why do you do that? What is the reason? And then he himself, he was asking the question, he was answering himself, you see. He said, we wanted to explore the spaces. And if you want to, how do you explore the spaces? You must experience them. Then how do you experience the spaces? So now you have drawn the plan, which is correct plan. Then I felt really good, because the plan was correct. So he said, what you have to do, you have to take a deep breath, just close your eyes, miniaturize yourself to the scale of the drawing, and start walking through the drawing. Walk through the drawing, open your eyes, look at left, right, front, what is happening around. Try to feel something about it. They go there, see every nick and corner, every room, and and take the staircase, go up there, there's little mezzanine, look down, and explore everything, and don't come out of the house until you feel something. That feeling may be right or wrong, And once you come out of this, then ask question to yourself again. Do I know what I'm doing? Well, that was thing, it was wonderful way, and that was stunning advice which he gave, and I changed that one particular session of talking to him, it changed me, how to look at the drawing. What he meant is that, and I'm just working hard and doing everything, but I don't think anything, He's awakened me. So that was a fantastic experience to, get listening to Doshi.
That's fantastic, sir. Thank you.
Doshi for me, I think
I just want to...
Please carry on.
No, go ahead, sir. You were saying something.
Doshi is, I think, if you see the Charles Korea and Doshi, we always compare. Charles Korea, we all know how impressive personality he is, and what a command on the language. He's so precise and very crisp and very highly articulated. And then in turn, instantly you'll get impressed with the Charles Korea. But Charles Korea, I will not say it's a problem, but the attitude. His attitude is, there are so many. He's a man in a hurry. He's and he wants to. He's a man in a hurry because there's so many ideas. And so many ideas. He wants to pursue all these ideas. So he's a little impatient person. Impatient because he want to. So I'll say Charles Korea is more like a fast-forward man. Fast. He just want to go ahead and do so many things. If you see Doshi is exactly opposite. He's very, very meditative person. Lots of patience. See, and I would say he's almost like Amitabh Bachchan. This is just a yogi. I mean, that's what he used to say. That Edgar used to say he's a yogi. So in his case, it doesn't mean he doesn't have many ideas. He also must be having so many ideas. I can imagine he must be, but he has a control over the idea. He will take a single idea and pursue all the way until the end. Charles Korea never does that. He bulldozes the project little bit. Therefore, you see, after a few years or maybe after a few decades, you'll find Doshi's building a lady, as Sanjay said, the aging so gracefully. Charles Korea may not, it may not happen. And I'm just wondering, suppose you just think the Indian stock management done by Charles Korea and he has to work for 25 years. What would have happened? What would have, does he have that patience to go through? And the whole building would have changed from to, I don't know how it began, the way it began and the way it ends would have been altogether different things. And not so in Doshi's case, It's very monastic. So I'll say Doshi is, I think, a slow motion conduct. I think Charles Korea is a fast forward person, And therefore, I think we used to call in base group that Charles Korea used to call Amitabh Bachchan in architecture. We used to say Doshi has an Puri in architecture, you see. So you can make out that, what it is. From person, it's quite interesting to analyze all these things. I don't know, Mohe, do you agree?
Yeah.
Because Mohe is Charles Korea's man, I have to take his opinion.
Clear now. Who's
What is that?
We need to make the clear now. Who's winning which group?
Let's not get to
No, I just try to analyze that. You fast forward, there's no doubt about it. He's in a hurry. Man is in a hurry.
See, what did I say? Every time they end up talking about the same thing.
Bijoy, if you pursue that line of thinking, you might provoke another of those heated base discussions. This time without alcohol as a mitigating influence.
Great. Claire, I just wanted to go ask you, when I asked you yesterday, we had a chat and I asked you about, influences in terms of your own photography and your own career, and now, a storied career with, doing all kinds of wonderful things. Rather than a photographer, you actually referred back to your time starting off with this gang, with this gang of guys looking at the world and sort of growing together. And so two questions. One is, of course, you've already touched upon a little bit the formative influence this group has had in the way that you see things and you operate. But also, when I look at all of, these mentors of mine, there is a sense of truth telling, of a certain integrity with which you work, and that the architecture needs to sort of stand for something, in terms of, whatever choices you make. And we've already seen that in this wonderful conversation, this idea that it's a really passionate sort of search for meaning. So I'm wondering if that's also in a lot of your work, this idea of truth telling as a way to conduct oneself in whatever profession one takes up. Claire?
So you want to know about what influenced me to work the way I do, or is that the question? I mean, I think that I was very young when I, this base group started, and and I wasn't even sure about my career path at that point. And I did the photograph for Jeffrey Bauer, and then in fact I shot for my second assignment was for Chandavarkar and Thacker, and I shot Mohe's buildings because when he worked there. And I think what was fantastic about it was, in a way, I was learning on the job, and because of that, they could then give me feedback. We would have these slideshows. We had that wall that was always there to show slides, and there was a huge sense of. I mean, I think the word truth is very good, because I think that fundamentally that's what the group stood for. They would say the truth, no matter no matter of the affiliations or and that's why it got heated. No one said what they thought they ought to say, and I felt that what Prem was saying actually was that there is a lack of that. I have exhibitions now, but there is never any critical analysis of my work or work of anyone's actually. Within India, the criticism that comes, or the analysis of your exhibition is purely descriptive of what it is. There is no criticism, and photography is actually a very isolating job. I work alone. It's not like in an architect's office. I work in solitude, and what I loved about the base group was that everything that I went away and shot, I would bring back and show it to this group. And then they would say, yes, Claire, that worked. No, that failed. Why don't you try this? And subsequently, post-base, I very rarely have that. I shoot for architects, have exhibitions. But very, very rarely do people give me that analysis of my work. So, it was profoundly important to me, the base group.
Also, the base group, we've got 5 of you here, and Edgar spoke briefly about Nikhil. I just want to, talk a little bit about Shankar and about Sarath Padalkar, who were the other sort of seminal pieces of this, the group. Sanjay, do you want to just say a little bit about Mr. Padalkar, about, because...
Yeah, I mean, he was a great thinker. I mean, whatever he would say, he would always think about it and make a statement. So when he would say something, that pause in his language was very, very important, with slight accent, because he spent quite a bit of time in Sweden. He had an equally good command on Hindi, and more like Urdu. So he would actually very, very poetic, whatever he would say. He used to make lovely drawings, and he was a great teacher with a lot of patience. He would actually understand the students, encourage them. I've never seen him getting angry with something, but very poetic. And we remember him singing in one of the quarries. When we had gone for we used to, for this IGNCA competition. We would travel to different places, including Nandi Hill and in Tuffy's farmhouse. And in the middle of the night, we started walking, and we encountered this one quarry. And he stood there and he sang one Marathi song with such amazing echo. And then, I mean, every one of us remember that so much. It keeps coming back, that memory of that his singing. So he was a multifaceted personality, and he had a very, very strong connection with Hassan School, and a lot of students have very, very nice memories about he and his teaching.
Actually, he taught.
Navnath, you want to just tell us? Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead, Edgar.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh.
Yeah, Edgar, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was just saying that, Hassan, yes, for sure, but that came much later. But they started teaching actually in UVC. Sharad taught in UVC, and that was probably the 70s onwards. And I've known, I don't know how many people who have taught. And I have actually invited him over one.
Your signal's not very good, Edgar. Can anyone else hear me? Navnath, can you hear me? Prem? How come? Hi, can you? What's happened?
I can hear you, Vijay.
Yeah,
yes, we can.
We've lost Edgar, and I don't know, the connection's gone.
Yes.
Yeah, I think we're kind of just on the dot here, coming to 2 o'clock. Sonam, you said that there were a few questions. Can you?
Yeah, I'll take that, Bijoy, if you're okay with that. Sonam, I think is
sure.
So,
yeah, sure.
Nandu, I'll give you the last question so you can carry on with what you wanted to say after that. Someone's asked who exactly were the Korea group and who were the Doshi gang. Would you like to elaborate? I mean, we could make out, but
yeah, but it kept on changing. It's not that something all the time you would stick to one, but let's not get into that.
Sanjay started off Korea group, but when he started working on IIM, he defected.
Sanjay, you got to tell us. We can't see you, Nandu.
So, no, Nandu, we'll bring Nandu at the end so that he has something to say in addition. So I'll ask the other questions before that. So we talked about, Prem was talking about this current pandemic kind of affecting the way people look at design. But Avantika wants to know if social distancing becomes the norm, what happens to such fantastic camaraderie such as the base group to develop with future generations? I mean, I don't know if there's need to take that, but since Avantika is a young architect, I think I said, let me put it to you.
I can comment on that. I think social distancing is just something we have to go through as a temporary measure till we get a vaccine and till we look at an alternative form where these kind of pandemics, we are not vulnerable to these kind of pandemics. But I would say that I am unhappy with the choice of the word social distancing.
Physical distancing.
And I think this discussion is reflective of that. What we are really seeking at this moment is social solidarity at a time of physical distancing.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I think to call it social distancing is a wrong choice of words.
Well said. You can take it from there. You spoke about architectural design being affected. If you can just spend a little time and say how Abhishek Anand has asked, how can design and architecture help with the impact of COVID and the architectural and construction field itself? We had a bit of a discussion in the morning on this, but would love your take on it.
I think one of the things that architecture has to get out of, and we've unfortunately sunk into it when so many visual images are circulating over the internet and smartphone, and people are making judgments based on visual impact. And this is not just architects, one is finding clients also doing that. And one of the things that we have to do, and in that way, our experience in the kind of discussions we had in BASE is immensely useful, is to look at architecture in terms of inhabitation, that there's architecture and then there's a body that steps into the space, and what's the experience of that body. And that's important. It's like Navnath talked about that lesson in Doshi's office about how he said, you don't just make a drawing, you actually seek to step into it and experience it. So I think to connect to that notion of experiencing architecture and then to think of, about a post-pandemic world and what kind of experience do we want? What kind of experience do we shape that impact how the world behaves? We'll have to start talking about sustainability in a completely different way. We have to start talking about resilience rather than efficiency, which has been the buzzword till now. So, but really look at it from an experiential point of view and look at architecture from the inhabitants' point of view.
Nice. I think this question is specifically targeted to Navnath, if I'm not wrong, about how Sangath went underground after Doshi met Soleri.
I had no idea. I was not here at that time.
Right.
So I came later on. But yes, somebody, senior person who was working with Doshi, his name is Desai. You know, he told me once I visited in 81 or something, 81 at that time. He says Soleri came, I think he came in 78. Am I right, Prem? He was in 78 or something? Soleri came to India in 78, I think, if I'm right. 1978.
No, yeah. It was before. I was still in college, so it would have been 75 or 76.
Oh,
maybe. And once he came, Desai told me he saw all the Soleri, because Soleri gave the slideshow. I mean, they gave all the presentation in the set, I believe. And then Desai told me, I don't know how true it is. He saw all these things. Suddenly, the whole design he put partially underground, you know, because after seeing this. That's what he told me. I don't know anything about it. Really. I have no idea.
Navnath, that question was from Shankar Narayan.
Ah, okay.
Where is Shankar Narayan? Okay,
So there's another
so that question was from Shankar Narayan, is it? Okay.
Yes, Hyderabad, yes. So there's a question to Prem again. What is the position of journalism in India? Education system doesn't encourage writing and journalism. How do we make that a strong profession in itself?
I think it has to start a lot earlier in education, and we don't encourage a culture of reading in school. If the exam system has bred reading as something you just get by to be able to answer exams, and reading as a mode of exploration and discovery. So it has to start with that. And then in school, one has to look at the idea of criticism. And I think we need to redefine the relationship between theory and practice. And there's a mistaken notion which gets taught in architecture schools that theory is foundational to practice, that you first build a philosophy and then practice is just an application of that philosophy. but to look at it as an ongoing conversation that never ends. So therefore, one must theorize as a way of critiquing practice. One must practice as a way of critiquing your theory, and that back and forth. In fact, theory and practice work best when they're contradicting each other. So I think that's a mode of thinking we need to start bringing into colleges. That's going to actually put a huge pressure on faculty, and we get a resistance from the current group of faculty in colleges, because you have people who actually have not invested in this level of thinking and this level of rigor, and they feel insecure in the classroom, so they sort of don't encourage this conversation. So actually, if you want to teach this, you have to be willing to go into a classroom and share your vulnerability, that you're still on this journey and you're still exploring yourself, and it's actually the sharing of that. In fact, my first job out of college was for Murad. I worked under Murad Chaudhry at Kanvinde Ryan Chaudhry, and he made a statement to me which I'll never forget. He was talking about his experiences as a teacher, and he said, "I can't teach architecture because architecture is not teachable in that sense. But what I can do is go into the college and communicate my passion for architecture. And if the student gets infected by that passion, then that student will learn architecture." So I think this, and that was what base group was about. It was about sharing passion. And that's a fundamental mode of teaching. We talk about teaching, we talk about curriculum, and we're always talking about syllabus. But to me, pedagogy is the core, and pedagogy is all about stepping into the classroom and sharing your passion. And that's the core of teaching. And if we can do that, we not only propagate design, we also propagate theory and journalism and all these things that have to come.
There are some teachers out here, and I'm sure they've taken something from that. I think there's a connect to the same question from Krishnamaya. I'm sorry, I'm not asking them to come up and ask because we're kind of short on time. She says, speaking in terms of critical analysis of architecture and art, do you see a pattern of it not being positively rewarded, where architecture criticism is relatively a foreign concept in India today?
I think if you're asking whether it is rewarded, you're starting with the wrong question. You do critical analysis for the joy of doing it yourself. You don't think about the reward.
Wow, yes, that's what the base group is all about also, I guess. I'll love...
It goes back to what the Bhagavad Gita teaches us also.
In fact, on a personal note, Prem, the more I meet you, I think there's a lot of that happening with you. So in terms of connecting and things like that, I've heard you speak, even in Bangalore at your office, I did see a different kind of a connection, the spiritual side of it kind of very evident in the way. Not that it wasn't earlier, but I see a lot of that more happening, and I'm glad to be listening to that because I think there's a lot of learning for me as a human being as well there. Can I ask Nandu to shoot from here?
So I got to thank Bijoy for thinking this up. When Geeta brought this up, I was like, wow, what a treat this is going to be. And for a fanboy like me, an architecture fanboy, I guess, this has been an amazing privilege and a treat. When I get back to these times of the COVID, I'll remember this afternoon for a long time. And thank you to the base group. I got to say, thank you in that way. It's amazing to hear you all together. I just saw the poster for Bijoy's next documentary, the black poster that's out there. So I'm waiting the movie. And Claire, if I can request you for a book on this bunch here, it'll be good to see all the photographs and all the transcripts in one place. And that would be a privilege too. And thank you to the whole group. It's been an amazing afternoon. And thank you for everybody who's joined from across the country. There's some participants from Pakistan too. And it's been great to share this with you. And thank you to the Acedge team and Ethos, and to our partners at NASA and Architecture Live. Thank you.
Thank you. Like Prem said, it was an era indeed, as we can see. What a delight this has been. Thank God Bijoy asked, offered to do this, and we jumped at that. Pearls of wisdom to take away, draw, draw, draw. Need to engage the body to make memories. I've heard that a few times. Draw what you don't see, not what you see. That is again something really beautiful. It's obvious that diverse people can come together to argue, to agree, to share architecture. What emerges from such dialogues can actually shape a generation. I mean, Bijoy is kind of an example. I wish I was studying in Bangalore at that time to really be touched by all that, I think. Yeah, any last words, Bijoy, before we close, or anybody else?
No, just thanks for sparing the time, and always an inspiration. Thanks, Geeta. Thanks, Nandu. I mean, you guys jumped at it, and so we were able to do it. About the movie, yeah, I've been meaning to do it. It's important conversations and really inspirational people. So thanks, Base Group. Thanks, Clare, Edgar, Sanjay, Prem, Navnath, and of course, Shankar, for your great, deep inspiration. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
How was it? Okay. I think
Navnath, it was spectacular.
close.